So I'm a scholar of electronic literature, and I hope to speak to folks at DMLL further about that. But today, in starting our talk and starting the day together, I just wanted to share with you some ideas around connected learning. And so, let's see, maybe I'll just do this. I'll go old school. I'm going to start with a few very brief comments that are obvious to all of you as we gather here today. First of all, the classroom is no longer bound by four walls. The world is ultimately at our fingertips. You know, the devices we hold in our hands sort of bring the world right in to the spaces we share. And this means a profound teaching and learning paradigm shift that we really need to respond to. So I wanted to open up this notion of what it means to connect and do that properly through a learning theory called connected learning. A lot of this work around connected learning was developed at the Connected Learning Lab and specifically at the University of California, Irvine. Some of the people involved were David Goldberg, Mimi Ito, and I'm going to show a brief video right now that introduces some of the concepts, and then I'll take it from there.
There is no longer a promised future for all kids. If people don't really learn how to learn and how to engage and how to be flexible and adaptive and find communities and have ideas about things that they want to do now, we're just really in trouble.
If we're going to compete with everyone else, then we can no longer say let's only educate a segment of society. We have to educate everyone, and we have to educate everyone to be creative and to think about things, which means we have to completely overhaul our education system. We have to completely overhaul how we think learning happens, and where it happens, and who's capable of learning.
There's a sense in which all kinds of resistance and indices. Yeah, our institutions have, to some degree, not completely, but to some degree, failed us and failed our children. And you know, the passion on our side is to try and open it up to find the ways in which learning and our learning institutions no longer fail us, that they actually become environments, ecologies, sites, spaces of excitement and engagement and interest and passion that delight learners at all ages.
We really think that part of what's wrong with the current educational system and why people talk about it as broken is because it's fundamentally starting with the wrong questions. The educational system often now starts with the question of outcomes. It starts with what do we want kids to learn? What are the goals? And what's the content? What's the material that they need to cover? And then everything is defined by that. It doesn't almost matter who the kid is, so long as we're going on pace through the material and through the content and reaching those educational standards or those outcomes, because that's our starting point. Our core question is, what's the experience we want kids to have? So the core question is around engagement. And as soon as you start with, is the kid engaged? What is the learning experience we want the kid to have? Then you have to pay attention to the kid. How do you create a need to know in a kid? That's an emotional question. That's an intellectual question. That's an identity question. And when you start designing learning experiences around that, then getting to the content and getting kids to engage in core questions related to academic core, that's actually the easy part. In school, we drone that out of kids. We so decontextualize what they're learning, we take it out of context and just teach them discrete facts because we're so focused on these outcomes that we've forgotten the learner and we've forgotten that we actually have a passion for learning.
We're so used to now giving responsibility for learning to professionals instead of looking at how it's part of the fabric of our interactions with everybody.
Education has been framed for a long time as somebody else's job. right? It's the job of the schools, it's the job of teachers. Schools can't possibly bear the burden, the sole burden of educating young people. All of this, the spaces, the churches, the home spaces, families, the neighborhood coffee shop, the person online across the world that's doing really interesting things, those are all people and groups that can help own the learning of any particular young person and really can contribute. So part of this conversation is trying to open up the question of who contributes and who is ultimately responsible for helping young people survive and thrive and grow up to be curious, engaged citizens.
What we've heard from kids over and over again through all of our research is that school's a node on the network of learning, so that they, in fact, are learning everywhere now, in part because of digital media, and in part because they always have.
The problem is effective matchmaking. So how does a kid find that mentor or that peer who is going to introduce them or support them in developing their interests, making their interests relevant, developing a sense of purpose? And it's not about actually finding the information anymore. How can we use the capacity of these network resources, these social connections, to bring people together who want to learn together? And not the model of how can we deliver content more effectively from a single source to many listeners. And that's fundamentally reconfiguring what we think of as the problem and goal of education.
So with that, I would like to present to you the actual sort of pillars of connected learning theory. And there's a few paradigms that need to be in play for this experience of connected learning to come together. And it's well mapped out in this informatic, but I'll walk through it with all of you. First of all, there's the idea of interest-powered learning. That is, when a student comes into the room, they have a bunch of interests. They might be a skateboarding aficionado, or they might be geeking out on retro games or something like this. But those interests that students take into the classroom are powerful and important and should play a role in whatever learning they're doing. So their interests should have a place within whatever learning experience and learning environment the educator is designing. The second thing is production-centered learning. We need to make things. So production-centered essentially is getting your hands busy and creating, making things, not just thinking about things abstractly. Peer-supported learning. All the people that come into the room know things, and those things should be in play in the interactions and the experience of the learning environment. So peers should play a significant role in how they learn in a classroom. This pillar, I think, is very important. It's shared purpose. That is, through community and conversation and connection that happens in a learning environment, sort of the cream rises to the top. There are certain conversations that are really impactful, and the group decides they care about these issues, and they're going to pursue them in some form through a project, etc. So it's almost like people coming together and realizing their values, the dispositions that are in the room, but then the values that matter the most, and those values move the work forward, whatever the shared work is. Academically oriented, that research plays a role in things, that, that there's a culture of accountability and referencing and citation, etc. Openly networked. So obviously, we're here today to talk about the open web, and the digital kind of revolution plays a significant role in what connected learning can be. That said, connected learning, it can also be an analog experience. It doesn't have to work in a digital environment. It's just that what we have at our fingertips at this moment in time just radically changes the game in a wonderful sense, in terms of possibilities. So those 6 pillars together are the kind of perfect recipe for a connected learning environment. So how did I achieve my own experience of connected learning as an educator? So I tried to create a networked pedagogy in any of the courses that I'm teaching, and I create that through specific infrastructures. So first of all, since I'm a literature and writing professor, I have to have them writing, of course. But I ask them to write in public. And the very fact that they're writing for a public audience, not just for the teacher, transforms the possibilities of what they perceive as their own learning. So how do we do that? I have a Reclaim hosting server, and in essence, every time I build out a course website, but I syndicate student blogs into that course website. So essentially, everyone can read everyone's weekly reflections. So there also is like a Twitter hashtag for every course I teach. So in essence, all the materials we're looking at can be accessed and seen by anyone who's surfing the open web. We have a consistent back channel that's going on. That hashtag provides for us a conversation that's always in the continuum. Also, I've often taught in a co-locational way. So I've identified colleagues who are in different parts of the world, in different locations, and then we teach in a co-teaching fashion, always with this open this open-facing design in mind. We do things like we have Twitter chats, so we engage each other from varying locations about specific issues, and we kind of roll out varying questions and then have a kind of fire hose of responses and interaction based on those possibilities. Also, we've designed things like studio visits. So we locate within our own professional learning networks specific artists or specific thinkers or educators who really open up the world for my students through conversation. We record these conversations in an informal chat. Students can weigh in by using the Twitter feed in order to ask questions, and often the students themselves are in the studio visit, so one of the members in the conversation. These things are recorded and archived as well, so they become a resource for an ongoing sense of a certain field or a certain issue. And also, we make use of something like daily creative prompts, and I'll make that clear in a minute. But basically, one thing I want to say right before I go into case studies, so getting more specific, is just the idea that open in and of itself, to teach in the open, to share all your resources, isn't necessarily delivering all the magic that can happen in a connected learning environment. So this, I guess at a certain point during a presentation at Open Ed Research Conference in Bristol last spring, Alan, my colleague, Alan Levine and I were chatting, and this quote was thrown out, and I said, "Open willy-nilly doesn't work unless you throw out anchors for students to become empowered." And that's really what connected learning is about. So I'd like to try to make that more evident in more specific details now by giving you guys a sense of certain case studies. Before I get to the case studies, I just want to say that this is this very nexus point in which I want to highlight today, that maybe open in and of itself is not enough. Participatory design for emergence is a complex sort of environment to sort of step into, and we need to break down how it works when it really does work versus when it seems more performative and that everything is just thrown out into the hyperspace. So we know that open offers a certain amount of accessibility. It's always on. It's free. Open is self-determined. Open is participatory, and open is permeable. Those are all qualities that are positive about open education. As well, we have a lot of aspects of participatory culture and participatory design that are so important. It's inclusive, it's malleable, it's public and visible, and it's open to controversies and contested experiences. So basically, the conversation and the negotiations are made in the open and become things that people can watch as much as weigh into. But the gold is in the connections that occur. That's what I'd like to say. Connections are the relationships that develop. Connection illuminates power dynamics, and connection can reshape the work, the world, the community. So I think it's very important that we think about how we develop an infrastructure around this idea of connection, using openness and participatory culture and design to get there. So now to my case study comments. The story I want to tell briefly is one in which I developed a course called Network Narratives, which had 2 iterations. So it ran in spring 17, spring 18. The first time I ran it, first of all, we developed it together. Alan Levine, AKA Cog Dog, and I developed this notion together that we were going to teach a digital storytelling class. As a professor of electronic literature, I'm sort of teaching them an emerging canon of digital art and electronic literature, but I also wanted my students to make and to get really involved with the production-centered aspects of digital composition. So what better partner than Alan Levine? So we came together to design a special course, which we did in the open, and we networked. So there we are together. And it was at the DML conference at the University of California in Irvine where we sort of came up with this crazy idea that the theme of our course was going to be alchemy. So we first settled on a hashtag, which is obviously an abbreviation of the term or the title Network Narratives. So alchemy, why alchemy? Well, first of all, in alchemy, we take something that's not so precious and turn it into something dear and valuable, right? But also, there's a lot of undercurrent aspects of alchemy that are profound. Like, for instance, the idea that it's a sort of illicit activity, that it has to be done on the sidelines. And I liked that idea of a kind of surreptitious journey towards transformation and change. So the other aspect of alchemy that I think is important is that it embeds within it the idea of breathing life into something that's inanimate. And so much of digital composition can really be just that, sort of breathing life into something that's flat through a kind of storytelling power that comes with digital composition possibilities. So we harness this, this metaphor, and we created a collaboratory online that lived in multiple platforms and multiple spaces. The Twitter hashtag that we had a course website, and all of our students syndicated there. We had studio visits, and we had all these kinds of components that built out a connected learning infrastructure. Some details on that. This one is very important. So during that conference, so the DML conference, where Alan and I put our heads together and got very excited about alchemy and digital alchemy specifically, we started playing around with our hashtag, NetNar, and there is an old or ancient cryptology formulation called Rot13. The Romans used to use it. And in essence, when you're writing any word in the alphabet, if you skip 13 letters forward, you can code something in a specific way and make it mysterious. So we ran NetNar through a Rot13 cryptology formulation online. And what spit out was the word argony. And we got very excited right away because argony sounds like a magical world, right? It sounds like some kind of transformative place. And so right away we knew we wanted to create sort of like an underworld or a mirror world to the course we were planning on teaching. we had this kind of complex narrative of a course that we were teaching, and that we were going to have some sort of notion of digital alchemy embedded. The course became robust, and it included, of course, our students, our enrolled students, but it included so many other participants from the outside who also got excited about a lot of this work. And it had the shades of the famous DS-106. Of course, you know, a lot of what Alan learned in rolling out DS-106 was brought to our design efforts here. So, so when I'm thinking about the infrastructuring of connected learning, I also want to share out just the idea that the studio visits were really powerful. Here's an example of practitioners or thinkers that are influential, that are part of our professional learning network, including Howard Rheingold or Flourish Klink and Elizabeth Minkle, who are experts in fan fiction. Howard Rheingold, of course, most of you probably know from his work around NetSmart and his coining of the term virtual community. Mark Marino and Rob Wittig, they are experts or scholars of NetProv. NetProv essentially is the idea of improvisational theater on the open web in collaborative writing. And we decided to harness this idea of NetProv in the design of the course, and I'll talk about that in a second. And we also spoke with Leonardo Flores, who loved to talk about Twitter bots and algorithms and generative writing. We had our students making Twitter bots for the course. But the thing I think, oh, and then one other piece of glue in the design were daily prompts, and we called them DDAs, an acronym for Daily Digital Alchemies. So every day in the morning on Twitter, there would be a prompt to do some little creative thing that would sort of give a boost to your day, tweet out something. It usually took about a minute to do, but there was a way in which the playfulness, and I emphasize the word play, the playfulness of this engagement on a daily basis sort of became a real building block for building out a culture for the course as well. So our daily digital alchemies always had a number. You know, this is the 219th daily digital alchemy, but essentially it's called shoe yang, where you just put two shoes that are funny or interesting to look at together. And so that's an example of something whimsical and quick, but people had fun with, and then would remix and play around with their friends, and that's how you create those connections, through those whimsical moments. We also had something called virtual bus tours, where we would go to different parts of the world, including Mexico, Vermont, Australia, Egypt, and just talk to students in other places and ask them to do things like look out the window and show us what it looks like, and scan the room, and then we'd have conversations about what their life was like, what their parking issues on campus were like. That seemed to be the common theme in all university contexts, was how bad parking was. So at any rate, those are different examples of how to create connections. But one of the most exciting things for me in terms of the design of this course was this idea of from NetNar to Argony. So NetNar is network narratives, and it's the formal representation of the network narratives course. And there were students in there, and there were artists, and there were other educators, et cetera, et cetera. But there was also a mirror world to NetNar, where everybody who participated created a digital alchemist persona. So we essentially role-played our way through the semester, where we would have ourselves talking, and then we would have essentially like a counter or an alternative persona that we designed with specific qualities and specific powers. And we interacted and we world-builded through this kind of double world. And one of the key aspects of this was that Alan and myself, as the professors of this course, made these like intro videos each week where we were talking about what we were going to do for the week, etc. And the videos started to become hacked. There'd be interception and weird coding coming through on the screen, and suddenly voices were being overlaid over our voices, and the hacking efforts became more and more problematic as the semester went on. And then we felt like we were, you know, being undermined in serious ways. We didn't know who these people were, and we would have conversations about it. And so all this was being played out as a netprov on, on the Twitter hashtag, etc. And many people didn't know if it was real or not, and we kind of kept it up. But to be honest with you, while Alan and I were doing this the whole time, we didn't know where we were going with it. We were just playing around and having fun and being performative. But it became very useful because in the end, we pointed to these hackers were actually from Argony. We realized there was this other mirror world to our world, and that all these digital alchemists were working to help us, send us signals to figure out how to make the world that we live in, meaning this world we all share, a better place. So how do we do that? Well, the digital alchemists had some suggestions about how to live online, how to be creative, what to imagine, etc. And so there was this conversation we were having with ourselves about how to improve the world we live in. And essentially, that was something we sort of fell upon. It emerged in the design of the course. It wasn't something that we had in mind when we started the course. In essence, this grand experiment in teaching students how to think about digital composition and recognizing what powerful literary forces exist in a computational world might be. All of these things also became a kind of platform for my own creativity, for Alan's own creativity, and a sort of broad invitation to the world to play with us. What did NetNair help me think about in terms of connections and building relationships? The first thing is that any network learning effort should have within it some kind of infrastructural strategy. So all those little things that I'm talking about, they're not little, they're significant things, like the studio visits we designed, or the bus tours where we met other people in other places along the way, or the daily digital prompts to make something, which led they were like seeds to growing a sense of community. All these things are infrastructuring strategies that move us towards just sharing in the open, a big dump out into hyperspace, and that it's not just that, it's building a world together and sharing and building relationships with each other. Remix played a profound role in how this course really worked, how the magic of connection really worked. Another thing that I thought a lot about through NetNair was this idea of designing for emergence. And what do I mean by that? That there wasn't an entirely clear and mapped out plan from the beginning. So you saw in the video this idea of the emphasis that's so profound these days in education on planned outcomes, student learning outcomes, and how much that drives the machine of education. So designing for emergence is basically admitting you don't know everything that's going to happen, and sort of being on your toes and ready to respond to what the community is telling you is happening, and thinking, oh, this will be cool if we sow a seed here. And then it's a constant dance, in a way, a creative dance, where you know from the beginning that you don't know everything that's going to happen, and that you're here to respond to that in some way, to be a part of something rather than a complete authority on what will happen. And then finally, I can't emphasize enough the role that imagination, remix, and play plays in shaping connections and shaping a connected learning environment. So that's sort of the brief, quick account of what Alan and I were able to achieve in this 2-iteration course, which we'll have a 3rd iteration of in the spring, if I can convince him to do it with me. Even without, it's always open for others. But there will be another NetNair. And I'll just mention, too, that in spring 2018, I was in Norway, as Jonathan mentioned, as a digital culture Fulbright professor. So at that time, I was dealing with a different cultural and intercultural environment, and it was fascinating to me to see the way in the Norwegian context, this took or became a certain kind of glue for a different kind of community than it did when I was teaching it in New Jersey. That opened up a whole other world of questions and inquiries that led to the current project that I am just going to mention here, but in the session that follows this session, there's a full focus on this beloved new project that I have designed with the excellent Catherine Cronin and the excellent Maha Bali, who many of you might know as well, who's at the American University in Cairo. We decided, the seed of this decision came from right here in Coventry, that intercultural learning and issues of equity were a profound concern at this stage in the development of networked learning and how we do it and how we do it right. And so we responded to that by trying to create another open invitation to come with us on a networked learning journey. And that that whole project is entitled Equity Unbound, which is ongoing at the moment. So in the next session, we'll be discussing what kind of work and what kind of learning we're doing in this context.